and welcome to Meet the Problem Solvers. My guest tonight is Dave Christopolis. He's the Executive Director of Hilltown Community Development, and we're going to hear all parts of that, Hilltown, community, and development. We're going to pull that apart. My name is Judy Perlman. I'm your host, and really looking forward to a really interesting conversation. Dave comes from Western Mass. He's going to talk to us about all kinds of things, and the byword of the day is rural economies. I've been talking to Dave about this, and I have to admit I have a hard time saying rural, so stick with me. So Dave, tell us, where are the Hilltowns, and why do we need to think about them?
Sure. Well, thank you, Judy. I really appreciate being here, being able to talk a little bit about Western Massachusetts, and particularly the Hilltowns. So it's kind of a cool word, and it's a real thing. The Hilltowns are a grouping of towns that are located in Western Massachusetts, and one way to describe them is to think of them geographically. So they run from the Vermont border down to the Connecticut border and kind of go north-south next to what people know as the Pioneer Valley on the east, and then on the west side, the Berkshires. And the Hilltowns are a series of small towns that typically have about 1,000 people living in each town, and they're contiguous, they're connected, and they are high in elevation. So they're called the Hilltowns because I live in the town of Goshen, and my house is about 1,200 feet, 1,400 feet up on these little hills.
Great. So one of the things that we talked about was that these communities are, in a way, each one is its own ecosystem economically and politically, but altogether, regionally, they also make up an ecosystem. And we were going to talk a little bit about some of those dynamics. And we're also really going to talk about some of the particular challenges that these communities are facing, that they've faced in the past, that they are facing as they look forward. And I promised you that Dave, in his guise as the Executive Director of Hilltown Community Development, would kind of walk us through all of those pieces. And so now I guess I'd like to ask you, Dave, to tell us a little bit about community development and how that fits into the picture.
Sure, I'm excited to talk about community development. It's my field of work. I'm also excited to talk about the Hilltowns because I live there and work there. And so let's do a quick little history. Back in the early 80s, 1981 or so, a group of people in the Hilltowns got together and decided that they wanted to form a little nonprofit to provide some planning and support for the Hilltowns. At that time, like a lot of parts of New England, there was a change happening in our economy, and we in the Hilltowns relied a lot on mills and agriculture. And a lot of the mills and the factory work was going away. And some people, I think, saw that and realized, we need to start thinking about what the next phase might be here. And as you can see, that's played out. All of us know kind of what's happened over the last 40 years to the industry. And so the Hilltown CDC, Hilltown Community Development Corporation, was formed. In fact, one of our most recent retired legislators, Stephen Kulik, helped form it and remained a legislator for 26 years and lives in Worthington, one of the Hilltowns. So we picked up from there. I'm probably the 9th or 10th executive director since 1981 that have, worked at this place. And our mission and our purpose has been to engage the community in the Hilltowns. And when I say the Hilltowns, it's really 38 or 39 towns out there, but we kind of focus on about 20 or so that are approximately close to where my office is, which is in Chesterfield, Mass. And then I have a satellite in Chester. So we serve those towns more readily, and then sometimes we will provide some support to a town that's a little bit further away. But that's kind of the intro, and what I think is one of the issues that I feel should be discussed is that I think the Hilltowns are relatively unknown to a lot of people in this state, and they do encompass a large square mile, over 600 square miles of really beautiful bucolic landscapes, and there are quite a few people living there in relation to the population in Western Mass. So, we've got 5 or 6 cities out there, and I'm talking about the 4 most western counties. The Hilltowns span each county. They cross over the borders of the counties. And so we really exist across all 4.
So Dave, tell us a little bit about really the economies
Sure.
in the Hilltowns overall, and also maybe give us a story to help us understand what it's like to live, work, earn, not earn.
Yeah. Well, many of us living in the hill towns have to commute to jobs in more population centers. So the most readily available communities would be Pittsfield or Northampton, Greenfield, Springfield. You know, the cities in Western Mass are all within half hour to 45 minutes or so of any given hill town. And so a lot of people have to commute and earn their living that way. A fair amount of people also work more than one job, people who are working more close to home. There's a strong history of agriculture and farming in the hill towns, and our organization sees that as a very important part of our culture and history. And so we do support local farmers through our small business program, one of the things we offer. And we just think that's a really important part of what it's like to live in the hill towns. There's a lot of land management going on there, and a lot of food production, and also what we call value-added products. And we believe that has a future for the hill towns and can be used not just as a way of earning income for someone, but also to promote the region through other means. So farms have people are interested in farming. Seems to be a movement now for healthy food and locally sourced food and that kind of thing. So the hill towns are in good position there. And then the other area that I had mentioned before is people working for themselves. There's a lot of self-employment, a lot of artists, a lot of musicians. I myself am a professional musician, and I earn part of my living doing that. I travel, I play for other people, I record, and there's a lot of my neighbors who are in the arts and supporting themselves one way or another that way. So it's a pretty diverse way of making a living. We are far from services and far from population centers. We don't have a lot of commercial activity in the hill towns. We tend to have to go into the small cities for services, shopping, goods and services, that kind of thing.
So you're going into the cities for healthcare and things like that. So that's certainly, I don't know if I would call that a hardship. Would you call that a hardship? Well, it's you don't move out there unless you're prepared to live that.
I wouldn't say it's a hardship, although it may be for some people. I think that it's a reality of living in a rural community. And I think all across this country, there are rural communities who, in many ways have been left behind a little bit from the economic advances of today's world. And that's difficult. The transition has been difficult, and we're not immune to it in Massachusetts. I think we're a little more protected here. We do benefit from a strong economy in general, and we benefit from the cities that are fairly close by. Whereas in other parts of the country, there are some rural regions that are really cut off.
Right.
It's not quite that here. But relative to Massachusetts, this is an urban state. Let's face it. So I think politically speaking, we have a lot of challenges in terms of our voice being heard. Because we're far out west and we have very few people. And our form of government is mostly volunteer.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that because that was one of the things we were talking about before the show was sort of some of the challenges. And so, Dave, dive into that sort of population sparseness, and that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, so you're going to give me an opportunity to say one of the phrases that I really like to say, which is I really see the hill towns and rural communities in general as kind of design problems to solve. And what I mean by that is the hill towns, if you think about them geographically, they are high up. We have a lot of ledge and hills that people have to live around and live on, and roads and those kinds of things have to be built in a challenging environment. I say to people, our nonprofit, we do affordable housing development and rehab homes, and when we do a new development, we often have to blast just to get a foundation in the ground or build a septic system or a well, which, by the way, we don't have any public infrastructure up in those hill towns, so we all have our own wells and septic systems. They're something you have to manage, and they're expensive, and they have environmental consequences too. So getting back to what was the primary issue there? I was talking about
the political.
Oh, right, the government. So we have select boards, and select boards are the unit of government in our towns. Because of the size, they're 3 people. Now, some select boards go up to 5, depending on the size of the town. But our towns are all 1,200 or so or under. My town of Goshen is 1,000, and we have 500 homes. So our select board is elected, and there's 3 people, and they serve their terms and they really only get paid a small stipend annually. These people are either retired or working full time, or more than one job, whatever. And that's the case for most of the positions. There's a couple paid positions in our towns, like highway department generally has a reasonably paid position. But even police and fire can be very part-time. Our ambulance service is a nonprofit. It's run by a group of towns that pay into it. So there's a lot of that kind of sharing of services that's required. You know, we need that kind of scale in order to get it done. Our towns don't generate a lot of tax revenue. It's almost exclusively property taxes. So we don't have a lot of commercial activity generate revenue for the towns. And then we rely on state aid, state grants. You know, everybody has a formula that they receive from the state for our roads and schools and that kind of thing. But some of the major challenges we face because of the sparse population, lack of a real strong tax base, is our school system is becoming very diffuse. Our local schools have closed because of loss of population, and our kids are being bused pretty far to neighboring school districts. That's a huge expense for our towns. It's a challenge for the kids to have to, go to another community with other children. It's also really hard on the parents who have to often transport these kids or pick them up, and there's a lot of driving that goes on if you live in the Hilltowns or any rural community, really. So I do think there are some limitations in that system of government that we have. It's really a capacity issue, in my opinion. And so our nonprofit does a lot of municipal support work, where we oftentimes will get involved in helping write grants for towns, helping them with some planning, helping them form some committees or that kind of thing, and provide some leadership and support around governance and that kind of thing. It's really necessary.
So we are here at Meet the Problem Solvers. Our problem solver expert tonight is Dave Christopolis. Thanks kind of putting us in the picture of what it is like to be in the Hilltowns. It seems challenging, but also very beautiful. And it sounds like there are, sort of merits and challenges and limitations. So let's think a little bit about some of the solutions that are happening both in your communities that your organization is part of, and also where some of the other rural initiatives that are happening nationally.
Sure. So let me try to go at it this way. The nonprofit Hilltown CDC, we're involved in a number of programs in the Hilltowns, and they're all kind of focused on either economic security or the economic future. We work with the housing out there. We build housing, rehab housing, and we do social service support too. So we're kind of providing a safety net as well as kind of stuff you might see a planning commission or a chamber of commerce do to some degree. But I do feel like at times we nibble around the edges. We're a nonprofit. We have a limited ability to bring in capital and that kind of stuff that's really needed to transform a community. So I think some of the solutions really require state government as well as local initiatives. So one of the things that I'm trying to do in my role at the CDC is to engage with state government to help them understand, like what we're doing today. I don't expect people to understand what goes on in our towns if you're not out there on a regular basis. So we need to be able to communicate. The state government's an important partner. There's a lot of exchanging of money that goes back and forth between the towns and the state. And there's a lot of public policy that gets generated. And again, we do have a fairly urban state, and I think that it's important that we help the state government understand what our needs are and be very clear about it and be realistic about it. So that's what I'm working on, and one of the approaches is to really think regionally about how we can work with state government to create some systems that are efficient for the towns around whether it's cost sharing, bulk purchasing, sharing positions even. Now, if we have a bunch of part-time people, it would be great if we could share some of the positions across the towns to create full-time jobs for people, that kind of thing. I also think that there are some public policy areas that I feel could make a big difference for our towns in terms of recognizing the limited capacity that we have to respond to grant opportunities at the state, for example. There are a number of really great state resources that are available to towns like ours, but oftentimes our towns miss out on it because they don't have someone who's capable of following the deadlines and that kind of thing, or really don't have any grant writers. There are talented people who work in the towns who probably could get a grant done if they had the time, but often they don't. So I've played that role often at the CDC. We've tried to partner with the towns and state government as an intermediary. So I'm kind of trying to help the government understand a little bit what the needs of the towns are, and I'm helping the towns figure out how they can respond, because it's a two-way thing. If you respond to it and you get the grant, then you have to implement the grant, and that takes capacity and takes commitment from people. So it's a very challenging set of circumstances, because it's great to get some money, it's great to be able to do something, but you've got to get the people to do it, and oftentimes they're not going to get paid. They're going to have to volunteer more. That's a real issue.
So that's something else on top of their work lives, yeah, or their regular work lives. It's something else that is asked of them.
Yes, and it does provide an opportunity for people to be directly involved in the future of their community in a way that's probably harder for some people in a very dense urban setting to get your voice heard. But if you come to a town meeting in a town of 500 people, there's a chance you're going to have a good chance to speak your mind, and you're going to be listened to. So part of it is trying to encourage and cultivate leadership in our community. It's not acceptable to me if the Hilltown CDC solves the problems. That's not my goal. My goal is to try to use our organization, the resources we have, and the money that we can often bring into the community to empower other people to become leaders of the community. It's not good enough for me if we take that role on. That's not really the purpose of our organization. What I want to do is work with people in the community who want and are motivated to lead the community, and empower them, so that it can just be, I think it's much more authentic that way. So we're providing a lot of opportunities to engage the community public arenas and taking on a topic.
Hey, let's talk about that for a second, because one of the things we had talked about a little bit before the show was basically the explosion of arts in Western Mass. And tell us a bit about who's out there and what's going on.
Right. So if you think about Western Mass, there's a good chance folks out here in Boston are pretty familiar with Tanglewood. Right. We have the Boston Symphony Orchestra out there every year. It's world renowned. And the Berkshires really have a number of world-renowned arts-related organizations like Jacob's Pillow and those kinds of things. Just unbelievable. And then Pioneer Valley, that what people often refer to as the five-college area, again, world-renowned colleges, Smith College, Amherst College. I mean, it's unbelievable. Hilltowns are in between those two zones, right? So we really can't compete with that. But at the same time, we have the same people living there, right? So we have an incredible talent of artists, musicians, and people who love the environment and care about the land. And so there's a lot of people farming. Whether they're doing it for a living or not, they're still doing it. We use the land out there. I do. I'm a musician. I run the CDC, and I've got a little hobby farming thing going on. So there's a lot of that going on. And so between the arts and agriculture, farming is an art. Agriculture is an art. And there are people farming in the Hilltowns that are just amazing. I really think people would be surprised to see what innovation is happening. And with the arts, it's challenging. I mean, people live far from each other, and we don't have a lot of venues where we can bring people together, but we do when we can. And one thing I'll tell you happens every Friday throughout the year is Friday Night Cafe. I've been a part of this at one of the churches where they have a music event every week and feature local artists. That's really fun. One of the things we've done with the CDC is engage local artists, and for the second year in a row now, we've helped sponsor a studio tour for artists. And this is where someone like yourself could come to the Hilltowns on a weekend that we promote and drive around to people's homes. Not only are you going to see this beautiful historic farmhouse that's been restored or whatever that you really aren't going to see in any other part of the country, right? This is where these homes are. They're historic, beautiful homes. They're some of the oldest. You'll also see this person's art. And I always tell the story 2 years ago when we did it. We had the tour, and one of the artists told us that they paid their mortgage with just that weekend. So this is like an example of something that we're doing that's promoting the arts, bringing in money for artists, and it was successful. Second year, we're already planning next year. The other thing I wanted to mention, Judy, that's also I kind of briefed on was food. And we do have a lot of people who are very interested in improving the conditions for farmers there. We're working on that. But it's also the other side of the equation, which is retail. And we have a real food desert kind of situation going on in the Hilltowns, where we have a small co-op grocer that we support, and we also have a small market that pretty much serves the towns I'm talking about. And the market is for sale, the little supermarket. We've been involved in this. Just to give you an example of a community-led effort that I was really impressed. I got involved, and a couple months ago the owners contacted us. They wanted to retire and sell, but they wanted to make sure that it was kept a store. This is a real long story. We can't get the whole thing today, but my point is that we called a community meeting and saw if people in town were interested in supporting this little market, and how important was it to people to have a local food place rather than have to drive to Northampton to get food. There was about 175 people in the Grange Hall that night for this community meeting that was not required. You didn't have to come. It was on your own volition. People came, they were coming out the doors because there was so many of them. And when we asked the question, how many people here would like to keep this little grocery store, every single hand went up. So it tells me, that people really care about this stuff, and it's really hard to do. And so we have spent numerous hours over the past 2 months poring over this small business to try to figure out, is this a feasible business that a group could purchase and move forward with? And there's even enough interest in the community that they're thinking about buying it as a group, as a community, so that they can, control the situation a little bit. It brings up the whole issue of succession planning in our community. We're an aging community, and a lot of the people who have established businesses that have been successful are reaching retirement age, and there's not a lot of younger people who have an interest in coming to a rural community like that, or maybe they're not aware of the opportunity. And part of what we're trying to do is create opportunities and conditions that might be attractive to people who might want to relocate, because it really is a great quality of life if you're willing to give it a shot, and I think we are really looking to open up that conversation a little more. Yeah.
It sounds great. I mean, it's very interesting because you've told us, without crying about it, but you've said there are some real challenges there. You have an infrastructure that is house by house, building by building, and you really can't create a public infrastructure. It's so hilly, and the rock is so hard, you can't build big things.
It's very expensive.
Very expensive.
And there's risks to the environment and stuff like that you have to deal with. I do think that there are reasons why the Hilltowns have some of these challenges. Mm-hmm. And part of it is the history of development or lack of development, and so today is different than it was 20, 30 years ago. And what the issues that we're trying to deal with, the outmigration of young people and the loss of population is a real serious factor, that really impacts our capacity and is a very challenging thing for a lot of rural communities in this country. So we really need some help with that, I believe. This is there's a change happening,
right.
Demographically, it's happening in our country, and we're not immune to that, right? So we're really focused on the future, and I really believe that we could be a model for 21st century rural communities, and that's my hope.
So this is Meet the Problem Solvers. I'm Judy Perlman. This is Dave Christopolis. Dave, help us understand now, as we've talked about this, give us sort of some takeaways, not just like what did we learn, but how is it that folks living in Eastern Massachusetts might take this new knowledge about your extremely lovely part of the state, and how should we think about our state?
Well, that's a tough question, but I think that in general, I think that there are potential opportunities for us to create some reciprocity between the eastern and western part of the state. And some people are focused on transportation; they want to train, all these things. I'm cool with all that, but I also want us to focus on us as people and making connections. We're not that far. I came out here in less than 3 hours to meet you in Cambridge today. It's not that difficult to travel back and forth. So I would encourage people to, do a little bit more of that. Come on out and check it out. And you can always look up my place, the Hilltown CDC, and we can kind of orientate you to the area. There's lots of fun things to do in the summer, and then in the winter, skiing and cross-country skiing, that kind of thing. So just to maybe come out and recreate a little. But in terms of how should we look at, we're a state, and we have an ecosystem that has to do with our economy, our services, all the things that make up our state, and the Hilltowns are a part of it. I mean, we're an essential part of it, and I think we can be seen as an asset to Massachusetts because it is a fairly dense part of the state out here. There's every time I come here, I'm in traffic. I have a hard time finding a parking place. So a lot of my time is taken up by that. If you come out to the Hilltowns, you're not going to have that problem. You're not going to sit in traffic. You're not going to have a hard time finding a parking place. You're going to get to what you're going to do, and you're going to get it done right away. Mm-hmm. So, I'm joking a little bit, but I think that, we have felt historically that it's been hard for our voice to be heard. I think that me being out here is just a great feeling that, I can talk a little bit about our community and hopefully turn a few heads, and we can, continue to develop this relationship. There is a fair amount, like I've said a couple times, there's a fair amount of work I think that could be done with state government. And I feel very grateful that I've been able to work directly with this current administration. They've been very supportive of our work and our ideas, and I feel very supported. And I felt that way in the last couple administrations.
That's great. Well, I learned a lot. Dave, thank you so much for coming in and helping us understand about the Hilltowns out in Western Mass. I will come and visit you.
Good.
I will definitely do it. These hot days, maybe there's a pond. I bet there are a lot of ponds.
There's lots of water. I have
water.
a river behind my house that's beautiful, but
Nice.
we have a couple lakes in my town that are just gorgeous. You will do that, and I'll show you around.
Okay.
It'll be really great.
So thanks everybody for being with us on Meet the Problem Solvers. Again, Dave Christopolis, thanks so much for telling us about the Hilltowns and raising our consciousness about rural economies. Mm-hmm.